Hello, everyone. Representing Michigan State 73rd House District and is a former alumni of Michigan State University. Please give a round of applause to Representative Julie Brixie.
Thank you guys for coming here for this conference. It's really such an important gathering of individuals. We know that mental health is really a huge burgeoning issue that continues to need additional resources and study. So I am delighted to welcome you to my district and hope that this conference brings a lot of good results and collaboration. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much, Representative. So we're going to go ahead and get started. I apologize that we are a bit delayed. So just going over some quick house rules. And for folks on Zoom, you'll see my screen in one moment. So as you all know, this is track A. Each presenter ideally has 20 minutes, but presenters, because we started late, if you could try to get it closer to 15, that would be much appreciated. So we have more time for Q&A. All of our Zoom attendees, I don't believe you'll be able to unmute yourself, but if for some reason you can, please stay muted, and our panelists as well. I will call on you also. Please unmute whenever I do that. If any of our Zoom attendees have any problems, please direct message our Zoom moderator, which is going to be Sarad Hassan. She will make a hi in the chat so you know exactly who she is. And she is our co-moderator for today, and I will be moderating. In terms of our in-person attendees, at any point in time, you can raise your hand and Sarad can come with a note card if you have any questions you want to ask any of our panelists. However, also when we get to Q&A, we'll allow you all to write down your questions and we'll bring that up front. I do want to ask, is Dr. Furqan Irfan here? Okay, hopefully he'll be joining us as the discussant. If not, we'll host the Q&A. The last thing is for our speakers, just know that for our in-person speaker, we'll have a timesheet that Sarad will hold up. 5 minutes, 3 minutes, and a 1 minute warning. If you're on Zoom, I will type in the chat 531. I'll just DM you personally on Zoom. And I think that's the final house rule. One other slide, a note to the audience. If at any point in time you feel like you might need to take a break from the content being shared, you're more than welcome to step outside and do what you need to take care of yourself. If you need any support or would like to speak to anyone at the conference, please let us know. You can let myself know, Sarad, Lemia, we're all on this track moderating. And with that, I will start with our first group. So I want to introduce Professor Fereshteh Ganjavi, as well as Leslie Koons and Zaharaa Altwaij. So these lovely folks have a presentation for us on the best emerging practices for refugee community work. And I'll give the bios for each of them so you all get familiar with who they are. So Professor Fereshteh Ganjavi is the founder and executive director of Alina's Light and is a former refugee from Afghanistan. Fereshteh had the goal of empowering refugees in Connecticut and holds a degree in public health and business administration. Leslie Koons is an MPH student, an MPH, and is a health researcher based at a refugee resettlement agency. She has over 10 years of direct experience in refugee health and wellness and serves on the board of directors at Alina's Light. And then lastly, Zaharaa Altwaij is the director of health and wellness at Alina's Light and is majoring in the history of science, medicine, and public health at Yale University as an undergrad. MashaAllah. And Zaharaa is the daughter of Iraqi refugees, and she helps to manage and oversee Alina's Light's health-related programming. So we'll get started with you all, and then as we switch to different presentations, I will do introductions for each of you all. And we'll be joined by 2 other speakers and 2 other presentations, inshallah, after this. So without further ado, I'm going to screen share you all's presentation. Okay, and Dr. Irfan just joined us. If you want to just take a seat over there at that table, yeah, which is great. So we have everyone here. All right, so Zoom folks, you should be able to see our screen, and I'll let Zahra and the other panelists, take it away.
Thank you so much, Sammy, and all of the other coordinators of this conference. My name is Zahra, as had been mentioned, and I'm a current undergrad at Yale University and the director of the Health and Wellness Program on behalf of Elena's Light. And so we are going to be discussing the best emerging practices for refugee community work. And with that being said, again, just no worries. Yeah, so thank you for joining us. Now we'll get started. Thank you. So I just wanted to take a moment to recognize the journey that a lot of refugees and immigrants take to get to the United States. Here in this photo, we have a group of refugee women. And we want to recognize that each person who came here to the United States had a unique journey. And resettling in the United States is definitely not easy. There are a lot of challenges. However, we at Elena's Light try to take into consideration all of the challenges that these families face in all parts of their resettlement journey. I wanted to take a moment to define what a refugee actually is. Refugees are people who have fled war, violence, conflict, or persecution and have crossed an international border to find safety in another country. The United States has the largest resettlement program in the world, and according to data published in 2019 by the US Census, there are especially high rates of refugees from Afghanistan. And in Elena's Light, which is based in Connecticut, specifically the greater New Haven area, we have a high number of Afghan immigrants and refugees specifically. So here in these tables, you can see that within the past decade especially, Afghan refugees have made up a significant proportion, the majority of incoming immigrants and refugees into the country. As I had mentioned, refugees face a host of stressors while they are here. In addition to before they even migrate to the United States, during the actual journey here, and post-migration when they arrive to the United States. And we want to acknowledge that there are issues all along the way, all of these stages, and so we hope to address each and every one of those when we are giving services to our clients. With the refugee experience, we tend to see that a lot of refugees have previous trauma from the life circumstances that they had escaped from, as well as PTSD, barriers to their integration, including language barriers and cultural integration. There's also typically isolation. Some families have to temporarily get isolated from one another, and as a result, people lose their support systems, especially when the reunion process takes a long time, when one family member arrives to the United States and then someone else still hasn't arrived. In addition, a lot of refugees feel that when they come to the United States, in order to fully integrate, they have to abandon or leave behind their customs, traditions, language, and religion. And this poses a lot of issues to the identity of refugees. As we all know, COVID-19 has also presented a host of other challenges and have left refugees especially vulnerable and stressed out about the nature of their journey here, especially with travel restrictions and sort of like the breakdown of the health system. We have barriers to not only refugees' arrival here, but to the timely care and diagnosis of health conditions. And in particular, I want to talk about mental health risks. Mental health risks increase food insecurity, job insecurity, and the inability to social distance, which is what we want to shed light on today, as the topic is refugee mental health. In this photo, you can see that one family had just these items when arriving here to the United States. And this really signals that some people really could not take much with them. Some people have even reported coming to the United States without shoes on their feet. So people really have to often just, in order to survive the awful circumstances they find themselves in, without anything else when they come here. And that brings me to, what does Elena's Light specifically do to address the needs of refugee families? Elena's Light mission, is to work to help build brighter futures for refugee women and children. And we envision a community that respects and celebrates diversity and provides equity of opportunity to all of its members. So why do we specifically focus on women and children when organizing our services? We find that refugee women and children often do not have equitable access to mental and behavioral health care. We aim to put the focus of the whole woman or the whole child in perspective, and a lot of times mental and behavioral health is a huge facet of that. And so there are often barriers related to language, acculturating in the US, and obtaining financial security through finding jobs and that sort of thing. Refugee women also do not have access to practical and tailored education that fulfills their specific needs. In particular, women who have grown up in a vastly different culture than we have around here in the United States have not only financial barriers, but also cultural, familial, and logistical barriers that prevent them from getting a proper education or seeking this education in the first place. Now I'm going to hand it over to Fereshteh Ganjavi, our executive director, to discuss more about our programming.
Thank you, Zahra, and salam to everyone. I'm so excited to see you all here. This is Fereshteh Ganjavi. I'm founder and director of Elena's Light, a nonprofit organization in Connecticut. It's my honor to be here for the second year and talk about the wonderful work myself and the team does in Connecticut. We have several different programs, but the main program and the basic one that we started Elena's Light was for the ESL. The goal was to have a group and helping some women, and it's ended up to become a non-profit and now trying to help hundreds of women that we see in Connecticut. The first program we started was ESL, but our ESL is very customized based, and it's one-on-one based the needs of learning driver license, getting driver license, and get the citizenship test pass, and then became independent and empowered. The second part of our work, which started and initiated in a conference such as this one, and talking with some doctors, and then we came up with the idea of in-home services for the ESL class, for the health classes. The fourth part, we try to communicate and engage and also showcases refugee lives to and refugee families to American society, to new neighbors, and that's bringing us to community outreach. Unfortunately, last year, because of Afghanistan collapse and changing the government, we were seeing a lot of needs for legal and advocacy for the most vulnerable Afghan refugees who are recently come to United States. I'm sure the needs are bigger than what we start. We are trying to be helpful as much as we can. We try to work with a different organization, bringing a lot of lawyers in place with other organizations to help refugee families apply for asylum, TPS, and many other area as needed. In last year, the 2022, the achievement we had was we had over 50 women in our classes during the year, and all of these 50 women had one-on-one individual tutors. We had over 45 volunteers from 15 universities across the country. Before COVID, all of our classes was in person, and we connected with the local students that we have from Yale, University of New Haven, Southern Connecticut State University, and some other university we have around. After the COVID, we feel of needing to change the system. We changed the curriculum, we changed the way that we train the clients and train the volunteers. It opened more door for us, actually. We were able to get more students who have experience of teaching and tutoring from all over United States, like someone in California who is a student for education and wants to again learn and gain more experience teaching a woman in Connecticut. That was wonderful. Kind of community revolution we saw, and I was very excited to see that movement. But this picture that you see was my lovely time with the volunteers when we had to go to the families and do the connections. We may start this process to have some in-home training for the ESL soon after this COVID a little bit getting cooled down. The health classes is one of my favorite subject, because just imagine a woman came to the United States for 25 years or 30 years old, never went to school, never had chance to learn. Is it not impossible here to go to school and start all over again? But it's not going to be a realistic or easy journey, because most of the women, they come with several kids, and it's really difficult for them to get adjust to go and start getting education. We try to simplify all of the medical terminology words and go back to the family's house in person or virtual, one-on-one or in group, a small group of 5 people, to tell them how they can how they can get this classes. I don't have that much time to explain. Can we go to the next slide? Okay, we do have a lot of Eleanor's Light community. We have a speaker series, we have donation drive, we have a lot of events. I would recommend you please to go to our website and learn more about us. If you like to do volunteer and work with us and join us to support these wonderful women and their children, please just send us an email and go to the website, because always we are looking for wonderful volunteers and awesome people like you in our community. Doesn't matter where you are, as long as you have a phone and internet and passion and love, you are more than welcome to join us. This is the legal advocacy, which I talk about it, and we are trying to do so much work here. Still, we need a pro bono lawyer, volunteers, and people who are familiar with this educational. We will do a lot of workshop. We would love if you have any education joining us to do this training and this journey easier for the community. Afghan Women's Circle, one of my favorite program, which main focus is on mental health. This one, I will give this handle to my best friend, colleagues, and board of director of Eleanor's Light, Miss Leslie Koons. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming and listening to us.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Fereshteh. Yes, much of our programming at Elena's Light aims to support our clients in mastering the acculturation process. As Zaharaa mentioned, that the post-migration experience, that's what when they come to the US, the stress of that alone can cause negative emotional and mental health outcomes. So that's what part of what we're aiming to do. And just to highlight one of the programs, this Afghan Women's Circle, I think if you can advance to the next slide. It was a 5-week support group. The women graduated and it was a big ceremony. And then after that, it was a 6-month mentorship where they were continued to be supported. Next slide, please. This gives you a quick overview of the topics that were covered in this Afghan Women's Circle. And again, this is just highlighting one of the programs, but it really focuses on a lot of what we do. Topics included motherhood, language, employment, socialization, cultural competence, women's health, financial literacy, the driver's license application, women's rights, and many more. The common goal being providing women with the knowledge to gain independence and resilience while advancing their understanding and practice of empowerment. And I think that word empowerment is so strong because that says a lot about our approach at Elena's Light to build resiliency and to build emotional health in our clients. When you understand how to do things, how to navigate systems, how to ask for an interpreter when you go to the doctor, how to go to your kids' parent-teacher conference, like what's the point if there's no problems? Things like that, just that whole acculturation process becomes so much smoother and really builds up their resilience. It goes a long way in building the women's strength and gaining that sense of control over their lives. They feel better for their future, for their families. And to highlight here, I'm trying to speed this up as much as I can, just to cover the main topics here for you. But we also feel very strongly about the value of research, and we're fortunate to engage in research as partners with local universities. So this, for example, was a Yale School of Public Health student who conducted a little bit of research during COVID and found out that how children were negatively impacted, their nutrition, their lack of physical exercise, the lack of social gathering, and how that can lead to depression. So what we do, again, is our programs, this Empower, and then on the next slide, the Why Healer. These are 2 programs that we run with Yale School of Medicine doctors who engage with us. They provide training and education in health and health literacy for our clients. We have the one, especially the Empower, is geared just for the children, getting them outside, getting them social. And we did it even during COVID. We held it in a parking lot, ways that we've had to adapt during that time. And these are just highlighting some of the things that we do. There is the research component to ensure that we are the way that we're going about this is the best way possible, and to quickly adapt if there's better things that we learn or new emerging practices. The slide that just ran by, that's a quick shout out to not all our partners, some of our partners. This could not be done. We could not do this without our community partners. And a big thank you. And here's different ways to connect with us. And with that, big thank you, and to take it back to Zaharaa. Thank you.
I just want to extend a quick thank you to everyone who watched us present. We really appreciate your support, and please connect with us in any way possible. I'm going to hand it over back to Sammy now.
Thank you so much. A quick round of applause for our presenters. Thank you all so much. And I apologize again for the time crunch. Our opening remarks went a bit over, but thank you all for presenting, and I need to check you out in Connecticut because I'm there often. Our next presenter is Ms. Hadia Zarzour. She will be speaking on the impact of a culturally competent PTSD treatment program and mobile application on trauma symptoms. Hadia Zarzour is a licensed therapist who came to the US in 2009 on a Fulbright scholarship to pursue her master's in community counseling at Loyola University. Since then, one second. There we go. Since then, she has been working with refugees and immigrants in the Certified in Global Refugee Trauma from Harvard University. Hadia co-founded the nonprofits Insan and Syrian Community Network. She also led the trauma team responding to the Christchurch, New Zealand shooting to support survivors. Hadia also established her own practice, Healing Zone, where she works with adults, teenagers, and families. Hadia received her bachelor's degree in psychology and her master's degree in education from Damascus University, Syria, where my dad also went to school a long time ago too. So that's very cool. And with that, I will pass it over to you, Hadia, and we're gonna screen share your slides.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Yes, okay, alhamdulillah. It's an honor. I just want to say two words that are really important to me. It's always an honor to be part of this conference, and congratulations on the 15th anniversary. I so much wanted to be there. It's been 10 years that I've been attending and presenting, and it always gives me this feeling of coming back home. So I want to say thank you to everyone, especially Dr. Farha Abbasi, for always giving us this feeling of being home. And thank you for all the volunteers and the organizers. Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So today's presentation, I think, is way more important than when it got accepted, like by the conference like few months ago, because of what happened in the past month as a result of the earthquake. And this was the main reason for me not being with you now in person. So my presentation is an example of hopefully reframing mental health interventions. I'm doing this by focusing on a mobile application with a very particularly difficult context in which people were in the midst of an active war. This requires a lot of energy, professional energy and expertise, and thinking creatively of how to serve this population in a way outside the norm of one-on-one intervention. So this, I mean, the study that I have, it's for the, between the, in 2019, but actually it's more important now because of what's happening. So let's go. Bismillah, next please. So what is the story? Just in those 2 years when we started developing this trauma program or modifying it and starting the application, those years we had like more than 500 children who were bombed and killed in Syria. Of course, if we think about all the war in Syria now, over 12 years, we have like over 1 million people who died. We stopped counting. But, you know, and now because of the earthquake, as you know, more people have died and more people have become displaced. So as a result, of course, when we think about the war, we think about trauma, as our colleagues mentioned before, how the war affects the trauma and PTSD and how it's very important to take care of it and address it. So I'm taking you now overseas to Syria and Turkey after we were in Connecticut. Next, please. Yeah, so who are we? This is لأنك إنسان in Arabic, إنسان in English. It means because you're human. It's a non-profit organization. We started in 2011 after the revolution in Syria. And we focus on providing psychosocial and spiritual support for refugees to many countries surrounding Syria, including Lebanon, Turkey, and Egypt, and we also have a team in the northern part of Syria. Next, please. So as was mentioned, I had the honor of working and studying with Dr. Richard Malika, doing the Harvard program for refugee trauma, and they always focused on the social instruments for healing. As it was mentioned in the previous lecture, we try to anchor people and help them with resources and things that they know, and they can be socially connected to others. So with at لأنك إنسان, we focus on school, spirituality, and also if whoever works with refugees know that we always focus on community healing versus individual healing. Next, please. So what are the programs? I'm just going to give you like an overview just to have an idea. We started with the feelings program for kids. We have stress management for women. We have coping with loss, child sexual abuse. We have theater, and we have now the 12-step program that I'll be presenting on. And we've been doing trainings and workshops and psychological first aid for people on the ground. And now I want to say particularly, we just received a grant, alhamdulillah, to work with 35 people who have psychological background. You know, we always have like a lot of needs for therapists. So we have people who have psychological background, who will train them as this trauma and crisis response after the earthquake. And as I said, this is part of the reason that I'm staying in the region now, and I couldn't be there with you as much as I wanted to. And they will be delivering this training and support to 11,000 people in 14 different towns in the northern part of Syria. Next, please. So these are in Arabic, just an overview. Next, please. If people would like to see programs in Arabic. We always focus on, you know, when it comes to kids, like art, and this is how we understand their feelings and what they're thinking. And, you know, it always hurts to see those when we ask them to draw about home. This is what they show us. It's all bombing and war and killing. We also have to say that this picture down, when with those kids smiling, it was during the time when a suburb of Syria called Al-Ghouta was bombed, and people were still trying to stay hopeful and to get the kids to play so they can distract them. Next, please. Okay, this is also examples for the groups. Next, please. We're just going to go quickly with these. Yeah, I love this picture of this child. A lot of work that I've been doing in the past month has been teaching people how to do deep breathing and doing it with them. We have people who are going out of, who were directly affected by the earthquake, and they were with us every single day for 3 weeks. We did like hotline through Zoom for 14 hours every single day to support people. And we gave them 4 hours of breathing, 2 hours. They wouldn't be breathing the whole time, but it's just teaching them slowly of how to breathe. So we had a session in the morning and a session in the evening. But this picture is like before from like children, how they're practicing breathing. And you see the theater on the left. Next, please. Okay, so now we get to this point of like talking about this program of what is the 12-step program. I'm sure most of you have heard of like the Alcoholics Anonymous and the 12-step program. So usually those programs are self-support programs, but they're facilitated in a group. So you can have your own pace of learning, but you are still within a group. So those programs aim to help individuals achieve emotional, cognitive, behavioral, spiritual, and social growth to enable them to lead productive life and increase coping with stressors because of trauma. They are based on spiritual principles, but many non-religious people have also benefited from them. Because the emphasis of the presence of God, everyone, you know, in however everyone understands God as a higher power. Next, please. So here we could see this. So we started, this is in 1935, the first program for AA, the 12-step program for Alcoholics Anonymous started. And then based on this, we have in 1986, 6, if I'm not mistaken. It was built on this program, the 12-step program for trauma survivors, Anonymous. Next, please. Okay, so this program focuses on principles, healing principles, which is acknowledging the problem, seeking a solution, surrendering to the problem or symptom, taking action, and praying to God as it's understood. Next, please. And these are the 12 steps for the trauma program. You see power, seeking meaning, trust versus shame. If you can take a look at them quickly. What these programs were very helpful. What we tried to do is to be more spiritually relevant to the Syrian people. So what we did, we modified and we added a spiritual component. It was based on spirituality, as I said, but we added the Islamic principle specifically. Next, please. So as I said, we started with AA, then the trauma program, the 12-step, and then we have our program that we called it Psychological Lifeline. Next, please. And whenever we're working on trauma, and even with this program, it focuses on, I was just told I have 5 minutes. Okay, on stages of recovery. Let's skip this, please, according to Judith Herman. We're gonna skip. Okay, so here what we modified. No, let's go back a little bit. Here, the one that says justice versus revenge. The first one says forgiveness versus revenge. And there is important concept in Islam. It's beautiful. When you're so much, you're traumatized or you're treated unjustly, you can't right away go to the level of forgiveness. First, you have the right to have justice. And then when you want, you can go to forgiveness, which is beautiful. Let's, next, please. Okay, so this is how it looks like, as we said, culturally and spiritually sensitive. Next, please. This is how it looks like inside. Let's next. Okay, it has a questionnaire, it has a group contract, it has a file with psychoeducation, assessment tools, activities, stories from Islamic tradition, tools to managing symptoms, resources and readings. And the most important, what we didn't find in the literature before, we found it as a limitation, was connecting to a mental health clinician. Usually those programs, whatever I found in the literature, was that people were worried about worsening trauma symptoms because it wasn't connected to any professionals. So we added this as part of the service. Next, please. Okay, so this is the psychoeducation. Next, we tell them about trauma. What are the symptoms? Yeah, what behavior manifestation? Next, please. So this is all part of the psychoeducation. Also part of it is giving them a case to understand how trauma looks like in people's life. Next, please. I can share the PowerPoint if you like. I just need to go fast. Okay, so this is step 1, the idea of power, surrendering to a higher power, and thinking about God's or Allah's attributes, that He's the all-knowing, He's the wise, He's the great, and He's the best planner. Next, please. That's another example. Okay, when we think we have the power, we have the issue of control. So we also discuss control and how we need to let go of control. Next, please. Okay, next. Okay, this is examples from the Islamic tradition. How, we use the story of Mary, how she was a strong woman, but she surrendered. She said, I wish I had died when she was giving birth. So there is nothing wrong with feeling scared or feeling like I can't take it anymore because of the human nature. Also, Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he called the whole year the year of sadness when he lost 2 of his most supportive people, his wife and his uncle. Next, please. Okay, finding meaning, existential questions. Next, please. And this, we find it a lot after the earthquake also. People outside Turkey and Syria, they're asking existential questions more than people inside. Next, please. Maybe we can talk about this in the discussion. So this was the research question. What is the impact of the 12-step trauma program on post-traumatic stress and post-traumatic growth symptoms? Next, please. Going to go so quickly. So this is the literature. Next, please. that shows there's an impact. Of course, we can use the apps, they're effective in working with symptoms, but not if the trauma is severe. Okay, next, please. So this is the method. We have only, it's a pilot study, so we have only 21 women. We started with almost 100, but because of the war and the displacement, we lost them. And we used two measures, the Harvard Trauma Questionnaire and the Post-Traumatic Growth Inventory. Next, please. Okay, we can, yeah, we can skip the procedure. It was through like 3 months. I'm just looking at the phone to see how many time left, how many minutes left. Okay, so if we go through the results, please skip them. The idea is we find good results of after we looked into the group and we looked into the two measures. The results show that there was increase in post-traumatic growth and decrease in post-traumatic stress symptoms, which is great. That's what gets me really excited about this app. Next, please, or about the program, the 12-step program. Next. So let's go to just the discussion quickly. Next, please. Yeah. These are all the results. I can share them. So as I mentioned earlier, what we try to fill the gap is finding professionals, connecting people to professionals whenever we see that the symptoms are severe. Because if they are severe, people cannot help themselves. Sometimes they get triggered by some of the examples that they see. So it's very important we tell them stop once we see that when they do the measure and the questionnaires and we see that they're highly systematic, we tell them to stop. They're not able to continue in the app and we refer them to a professional. Next, please. The limitations is a small sample, and we only also, like, we were not able to have men. Okay, only women. So we're hoping that we can have men and women. And the very last thing I want to say is that we need more studies and we need funding, especially now because of the earthquake. It's a huge crisis. And I want to say, I really hope that people can look into psychological intervention as a humanitarian factor. It's not something that happens after. The more that we support people at the beginning, the more that we can decrease serious disorders. And having this app will make everyone use it easily, and we can approach thousands and hundreds of thousands of people. Next, okay, yeah, we're done. We can talk about this later, maybe in the discussion. Okay, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you so much, Ms. Zarzour. That was amazing, and I appreciate all of our panelists today. I know the time is brief, but we do want to get to questions. And just as a quick reminder, in-person folks, if you have questions at any point in time, we'll also do this before the Q&A, but you're welcome to raise your hand. One of our co-moderating team members will walk over to you, give you a piece of paper and a pen, and take your question. So just a quick reminder, at any point in time, just raise your hand and make sure they can see you over here. Next up, we have Dr. Suzy Ismail. She is the founding director of Cornerstone, a nonprofit spiritual socio-emotional wellness organization. She is the author of several books and specializes in delivering faith-based intervention strategies using alternative therapeutic techniques rooted in relational and emotional resilience. Dr. Ismail has taught at several universities, served in refugee camps abroad, and continues to work with refugee service organizations. She currently lives in New Jersey with her husband and 3 children. And Dr. Ismail, I will share your slides right now.
All right, perfect. Thank you so much for the introduction, and Jazakumullah khair for being in this session, to the attendees and to the organizers. It's actually my first time at the Muslim Mental Health Conference, but I've heard great things, so I'm happy to be joining, even though I could only join virtually. So since it seems like time escapes very quickly in these sessions, I'm going to dive right in and introduce kind of the topic that I wanted to cover. And I think building upon our other speakers in the panel, their topics, I think this ties in really well because the focus of the work that we do at Cornerstone is being able to provide a collectivist approach to counseling, which essentially acts as the bridge to destigmatize mental health care, particularly for immigrants, refugee communities, and communities at large that tend to have difficulty in terms of connecting with the more individualistic perspective that is usually utilized in terms of therapeutic interventions in the US. So our focus really is on understanding the impact of collectivism on emotional resilience. We have 5 different divisions at Cornerstone. One of our divisions does focus on refugee intervention. And I'm happy to kind of share with everyone that we just recently, a few weeks ago, signed a federal agreement to provide our services nationally with all of the IRC, the International Rescue Committee offices in the 27 different locations in the US. So we're seeing much more interest and understanding and willingness to work with alternative therapeutic interventions with refugee clients in particular, in recognizing that the traditional Western-based concepts of mental health therapy, mental health counseling that has been traditionally used does not always work, particularly with vulnerable communities, vulnerable populations, such as refugees. So I often start my sessions on this topic with an image similar to this, because we often, when we Google in Google Images, refugee, we'll often find pictures that are similar to the one that comes on the screen. And often when I ask people to identify what they see in the picture, the response is, sadness, loss, hardship, a lot of negative connotations. But the reality is that when you look at an image like this, or, we conducted a study on several hundreds of images actually to see the response that people from a Western paradigm might have to the images, and then looking at the nonverbal cues in terms of facial muscle movement to identify what the individuals may have been expressing. And in a picture like this, if you take a look at the lower facial muscle movement of almost all of the individuals identified in the picture, you actually see an upward movement of the facial muscles, which is usually indicative of positive connotative emotions. So instead of loss, hardship, difficulty, a lot of times the terminology that more accurately maybe captures the emotions that are being felt in this flight stage of transition for refugees is hopefulness, is resilience, is, togetherness, family, positive words that also are delineating more of a collectivist approach. If we go to the next slide, we'll see that one of the studies that we conducted in trying to better understand emotional resilience was a study on first trying to recognize how do you define collectivism, and particularly how is collectivism defined within the refugee context. And one of the studies that we conducted, which was a longitudinal study over several years, particularly with Syrian refugees, focused on the words and the terminologies that were used, particularly in oral histories that were captured, depicting the elements of collectivism and how those translated in day-to-day life. And rather than getting, steeped and mired in the technical aspects of the study, I'm going to kind of fast forward to the applicable results and the practical use of what we learned from our research. So if we go to the next slide, we'll see a continuation of some of the categories that consistently came up in the oral histories that were shared. And these were oral histories that were shared not just by Syrian refugees who identified as part of the Muslim faith, but we had Syrian refugees identifying as agnostic, as atheist, as Ismaili, as Shia, as Christian, as a variety of faith adherents. And in each of those cases, we saw a repetition of keywords that were indicative of collectivism. And of course, we see the category of family being very large, the category of hope, community, and selflessness. Well, if we go to the next slide, you can just take a quick look at some of the participant IDs. And again, we tried to assess, and this was conducted in 2017, 2018, 2019. So it continued a bit up until COVID. You can see the educations were different, the religion was different, marital status, male and female, and the country of resettlement also differed based on the study participants. All right, if we go to the next slide now, we can dive into what we understood about collectivism and how it directly translated into the therapeutic models and the therapeutic approaches that we use at Cornerstone. And one of the things that we found, of course, from a collectivist standpoint, is the recognition that here in the US, here in Western perspectives, we do tend to be very individualistic focused when we try to target someone who is experiencing trauma, when we try to unpack that trauma or try to take a mental health approach in treatment or in care. And that idea of individualistic care means that we start often at the microsystem. And many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems theory from the field of sociology and social work. It's quite often referenced. But the idea of starting at the microsystem means that we zone in on the individual, on the self, and we focus on what's going on within the person rather than extending outwards or, starting with the external, rather than starting with the macro system or the exosystem or the mesosystem. We tend to start with the microsystem and emanate outwards. And what this winds up doing is that a lot of times we utilize I as a focal point. We use it in our language. We use it in how we communicate. It shows up in our nonverbals. It shows up in the very fabric of the identity that is developed here in the US and in many Western countries that tend to rank highly on the scale of individualism. And I always find it interesting that when we talk about taking more of a collectivist approach, we see that, in the concept of wellness, there's a we, whereas in the concept of illness, there's an I. And when we change the way that we approach mental health care or trauma-informed care for the clients that we serve from collectivist community, for the clients we serve from vulnerable populations, forced migrants, refugees, SIVs, we change the focus from an illness-oriented individualistic perspective to a collectivist-oriented wellness perspective. So if we go to the next slide, again, we can see how this applies practically. So in a practical sense of the approach, when someone here in the US goes to a therapist's office, a counselor's office, goes to see a psychologist, oftentimes the first question that they're asked is, how are you, right? And this is something that we do even in our day-to-day interactions, right? It's, hey, how are you? Hi, how are you? So immediately we begin at the intrapersonal level. What's going on with you? How are you doing? But when we look at the greeting, for example, within the Muslim community, a Muslim faith-based greeting, and we know, of course, in recent years, many of the forced migrant crises that we've been seeing have been linked to individuals coming from Muslim-based countries. When we look at the Muslim greeting, we hear, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, right? First of all, it's a very collectivist approach. It's not Assalamu alayka, right? It's not, peace be upon you, singular. It's peace be upon you, plural, right? It's also very much not at the intrapersonal level. It's not about the individual in that moment. That greeting is a collective greeting, and it's a greeting that encompasses a wishing of peace upon someone, a wishing of mercy upon someone that differs greatly from the inquisitive approach that we might say of how are you? So shifting gears a little bit and starting, for example, and communicating with our refugee clients, our refugee community members with, how is the family? How are things back home? How has life been for everyone that came with you into this country? So changing the way that we approach our communication methods can also really help. If we go to the next slide, we'll see, Elena's Light, the group went over this slightly, and also Hadia in her session went over it. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but we definitely see that, the stages of trauma that refugees go through has severe and deep impact on the manifestation of the trauma in day-to-day action. So, of course, we know that there's the pre-flight trauma, which is all of the fears that exist prior to leaving the country of crisis, the flight trauma, which is everything experienced during the flight stage, and then the post-flight, which is where many of us tend to come in our resettlement work. And so a lot of times, I use the example of, the refugee client that volunteers are serving, where maybe they deliver a couch to this client. And, when the couch is delivered, the client gets very upset emotionally and, gets agitated and says, this is not the color couch that I wanted. And there may be loud voices, there may be aggression, there may be a very negative, intense response. And a lot of times this is the post-flight trauma that we're seeing, where having packed all of the emotions, pushed them down and not having been able to deal with them in pre-flight and flight stage, in post-flight stage, the feeling of loss, of grief, of heaviness that comes to the surface is now kind of pushed towards something tangible, the color of the couch, the shape of the couch, the size of the couch, rather than being able to grasp the intangible, the loss of loved ones, the loss of home, the feeling of being unanchored. We'll go to the next slide, and I know I only have a few minutes left. So in the next slide, we'll see a little bit more about the impact that our services as refugee service organizations, as those who are working in the refugee landscape, the impact that it can have on meeting the emotional and wellness needs of our clients. Oftentimes, our refugee service organizations do a great job in the physiological side of things, focusing on food, on apartment, on making sure that the physiological needs are met. We often do a great job on safety needs, making sure the kids are in school, that there is a safe place that they're living, that they're not walking to places alone. When it comes to love and belonging, we tend to struggle because we tend to define love and belonging from our perspective. So we may think that, for example, in bringing the refugees off the safe havens after the Afghan crisis, we were many times in resettlement agencies trying to place the Afghans in communities where Dari was spoken, Pashto was spoken, Farsi was spoken, linguistically based belonging. But in reality, many of the community members didn't want to be anywhere near someone who was from the same village or the same area. So rethinking love and belonging is an important step in the process of delivering trauma-informed care in our services. Also rethinking the pinnacle of esteem and self-actualization as being where we want to get our refugee clients to. We often talk about self-transcendence as much more of a collectivist goal. The idea of not just focusing on the self, but building a collective, building a community. And many times our Western perspectives of pushing towards self-sufficiency backfire because it's very isolating and very lonely, rather than pushing towards a collectivist approach. All right, if we go to the next slide, in the last 3 minutes that we have left, I'll try to see what we can cover here. So a lot of what we do in our work at Cornerstone is built upon Hofstede's value dimensions and a Hull's theory of contextualization. And we build our therapeutic interventions focused on different elements that manifest themselves in terms of the interactions that individuals have that are culturally divergent from what we may see here in the US. So we definitely see differences in individualism and collectivism, differences in power distance and uncertainty avoidance, in contextualization, in masculinity and femininity in terms of emotional aspects and the way that it is captured, and definitely in terms of time. And the time one is an important one because we tend to be very monochronic in our country here in the US, which means seeing time as a fixed entity, whereas many of our refugee clients tend to be polychronic, where time is very fluid. And we built into our sessions and intervention programs fluidity in terms of time in order to appeal to our refugee clients and connect with them from a polychronic perspective. All right, so I've got a minute left, so we can move through the next slides. This just very quickly, understanding the languages of love, which many of you I'm sure are familiar with Gary Chapman's little book, The 5 Languages of Love, understanding how it translates in our work with refugee clients has been hugely impactful as well. We tend to be a land of affirmation. We want to tell our clients, good job, I'm so proud of you, great work. But most of our collectivist clients who are forced migrants tend to speak the language of service or the language of time. So learning how to shift our tongues and how we connect with individuals. All right, next slide. I know in many of the sessions throughout this conference, you're going to go much deeper into PTSD, BPD, OCD, scrupulosity, and many of the other mental health outcomes. So we'll skip that one and we'll kind of wrap up. If you go through the next couple of slides pretty quickly, it just kind of focuses on how do we achieve that concept of self-transcendence, and you can move to the next slide as well, through building more of a collectivist approach rather than an individualistic approach in our therapeutic models. Move to the next slide, and really transform the direction that we're going in by focusing on the recognition that there are alternative therapeutic interventions that can be used, and they do not have to follow the Western paradigm of an intrapersonal approach. Next slide. So really understanding this, movement for transformation. Our organization has reworked different therapeutic approaches, such as narrative therapy, Bawanian and triangulation, family systems approaches, to fit more of a spiritual, psycho-socio-emotional, relational wellness approach, which changes the way that we provide therapeutic interventions. And that spiritual component is very important, just as Sister Hadia had spoken about before. All right, so this is kind of the conclusion of our work. And if you go to the next slide, we have a couple of case studies. Clearly, we don't have time to get to them. I'm sure these slides are going to be shared though. And if we go to the next 2 slides, we just have our references listed there and our contact information. And you're definitely welcome to contact our organization or to contact me directly if you'd like to learn more about our training programs that can help train you, your staff, your organizations in the cornerstone method of collectivist therapeutic intervention. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ismail. So thank you all to our panelists. That was wonderful. I wish we had more time with you all, but we're going to switch to our Q&A right now. So Dr. Furqan Irfan, a assistant in the Department of Neurology and the Director of Research Development in the College of Osteopathic Medicine here at Michigan State University. So he's going to be leading our discussion. And first, if you like.
Nice to see you, Dr. Suzy and Dr. Hadia.
Very nice to see you as well. I wanted to say that we're together again. I can't believe it's a whole year.
Yeah, exactly.
No, it's good to see you, Fereshteh, again. I'm hoping I'll get to see you maybe at the Pittsburgh convening again or something this year, or Hello Neighbor. We'll see. And
Yeah.
And it's nice to meet you, Sister Hadia. I've heard of your work, but I don't think we've ever met. So
yeah, very nice to meet you as well. MashaAllah, yani, yeah, it's great. Inshallah, we will talk after.
yes.
Oh, can you all hear me on Zoom?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Actually, I'm I'm so sorry. That microphone doesn't reach that far.
Hi, good morning. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you for the nice talks. We will start with questions. I've received some of them on Zoom, so I'll just quickly go over through those first, and then we'll take turns in asking questions from the audience here, and then we'll alternate with the Zoom questions as well. So pretty much, I think all of the speakers have said that the PowerPoints can be shared. That was the first question. Another question was, where can we access the app, name of the app? It doesn't say the Insan app or the Cornerstone app,
Yes.
but
Well, yeah, I mean, it's actually very unfortunate that the app now is not working, ironically.
So we had, which is, I felt it's a good time just to say, yeah, we have a lot of, something went wrong and now we have like, we really need funding for it. So yeah, this is kind of ironic that, but I hope maybe it's a good time for that. Yeah, if we have time, I want to share what I had on the very last picture, very last slide of how effective this app has been, but let's just answer the questions and then we see if we have time.
Sure. Another question was, what has been one of the most impactful strategies you used when working with the community? And I think this is a question across the board. So feel free to describe what has been your most successful strategy.
I think when we work with people through the lens of post-traumatic growth, I mean, which is, you know, when we support people and they can manage and learn and heal from the symptoms, then they can bounce forward and they can learn from this trauma and they can grow from it. I guess it's very important for us. You know, we human beings are very sensitive to how people interact with us. And even when someone, especially for refugees, I feel like they're very sensitive. Even myself being Syrian, I had a time when I really couldn't hear the word refugee anymore because it becomes like triggering to me, or where people feel like, yeah, you see the pity, like, although like I myself wasn't a refugee, but still I could feel how people have this reaction. So it's very important when we talk to this other person to even I'm talking if we're not professionals, just to think about it as, okay, what really resources of strength allowed this person to leave everything and start a new life, versus thinking, oh, you know, like the refugees, PTSD right away. So let's not label, and I think that's the most important, and thinking about, let me learn from this person of like how strong he or she was.
Okay. Let's take a question from the audience. Can we?
I don't know if anyone would like to add to that point, because there's a lot to be said, but that's what I feel like
Can we get
it
the
was
mic to Dr. Ismail?
And the Zoom folks can still hear me okay?
Yes.
Wonderful.
Good morning. I just want to thank you guys for such excellent presentation. I sit here as an associate professor and colleague of Furqan, and amazed at the kind of work you do and how important that is. My question for all of you, and this is because in terms of the fact that each of you are delivering interventions that are collectivist and using a different approach than the kind of individual focused kind of interventions that is maybe more typical in this setting. I'm a clinical epidemiologist. I work in a global context. And often the questions that we come up with is that they are, when you do this work, there are facilitators that you must work with if you're going to reach communities. And so what level of training is sufficient? And what do you think is necessary in terms, as you think about the people, but whether Hadia is you training people in Syria and delivering that work, do they have to come with what level of training is sufficient and effective? And that is also the same for whether you're doing the work in Connecticut or New Jersey. And just speaking to that would be very helpful. Thank you.
So I'll take a quick stab at this one. So at Cornerstone, we actually have a 2-year training program. We have a curriculum that we've developed that focuses on the 5 different divisions that we have. We select individuals who are doing work in the community, who are already known to be the go-to. So the person, you know, the imam who solves the marriage problems normally, you know, the youth director who deals with many LGBTQ issues, the refugee resettlement agency agency or the service organization that is working on the ground with the refugees. So we actually will select individuals within, across the US and also internationally. So we're also based in London, Ontario, and in Sandwell and Dudley outside of Birmingham, England. And we'll select individuals who we know are kind of informally doing this work, and we take them through our 2-year training program. The first year is curriculum-based with, they can do it online or in person through different residencies that we have. And then the second year is under supervision where they complete their hours. So to be a trained interventionist through Cornerstone, you would have to follow that procedure.
Hadia, would you?
Yeah, well, I mean, I work, I'm based in the US, so working, when you come here to the region, you feel it's like such a luxury to have a long time. And it's really kind of, this is very unfortunate, I have to say, because now what we do, for example, the trainings that we gave in the past or now that we're gonna give specifically for the earthquake is usually only 3 months. So we have this manual that we give, we focus on psychoeducation, basic listening skills, spiritual support, and breathing techniques, and some resources like grounding, very simple things, because we don't have professionals. So that's an issue. What we do is that we supervise them, we follow with them. But we have a lot of people who are doing this work voluntarily, and that's another issue because we are really burning out. I mean, including myself, honestly. I wish today, like I'm happy to be here to be able to help, but I'm really exhausted. So that's an issue, and that's an issue even when you think about it as on a UN level. Like when you see the UN, for example, they're asking for people to volunteer to give psychological first aid, which is really sad. So that's why really we need to think about like changing the policies and change. This is not sustainable. So the answer is, you will find people who have some background in psychology. Even the people who studied in Syria now, compared to 20 years when I studied, there are of course more people, but they don't have training. It's like you finish your bachelor's and that's it. You go and you call yourself psychologist, or people tell you to call you psychologist and you go. I mean, to be honest, not because I'm kind of biased to the US, but we in the US have really, I think, from what I understand, longer training than way like other countries in terms of like, sorry, maybe I'm kind of talking about different points here, but this is crucial. This question is super important. Are there mistakes? I'm sure we try really our best, but I'm sure there are huge mistakes because of that, because there is no sufficient training and there is no time and there are no resources, unfortunately.
Thank you, Hadia. Let's move on to another question that came from Zoom. This is specifically for Cornerstone. What are your biggest challenges with refugee clients?
Okay, so yes, I did see that question and I typed the answer in. But I would say, being able to move past the physiological, so many times when our refugees resettle, the focus is on, I need more money, I need to be able to move to a better place. I need to have a car, and while all of the physiological needs are super important, we also see that some of the blockages to getting that job, to being able to earn a higher salary, to being able to move to a better place are actually very much, tied to a lack of emotional and mental wellness. And that if we were to tackle the mental and emotional wellness, we can also see a correlation in, positive outcomes for the physiological needs. So I think one of our biggest challenges is being able to guide our clients towards that place of recognition that, yes, you do need all of those physiological aspects, but we can get there while simultaneously working on mental and emotional well-being.
Thank you, Suzy. I think we've got time for 1 or 2 more questions. Anyone from the audience?
Salam alaikum. Sister Hadia, I noticed that you termed the app the psychological lifeline, though there was a lot of focus on spiritual tools in that. And I was just wondering the decision for that and how it was received. I know there's a lot of stigma around mental health in certain communities. Thank you.
You mean what was received, the aspect of the spiritual aspect, or which one? I'm sorry.
The choice to call it the psychological lifeline, if that received any pushback or if that was with ease.
Not really. I mean, yeah, not that I can think of. I mean, we call it in Arabic, it's maybe because of the Arabic name, actually, Sharayan al-Hayat. So it's maybe when you translate it, it's not as, actually now that I'm thinking about it, it doesn't tell. I don't think we did that on purpose, but it's interesting now that I'm thinking about it. But like, again, people have been really benefiting. I don't know if I have this, I want to say quickly that this last slide that I wanted to show, and I can share my slides. We had someone who took this program and then got detained in the Assad regime prisons. And then she said they had someone they killed someone. And I'm sorry, maybe it's really kind of maybe heavy, but look how the importance of a program. You wouldn't think that that's how it's impactful. So she was there with this dead person in the cell alone. And she said, the only thing that kept me going is remembering the 12 steps that I learned. And she would write them on the wall. And she said, when she went out of prison, she told us, she drew herself and she said, please give it to people and tell them how much I benefited. So she was trying to think of like power, meaning, she couldn't think of the connecting to people because that was hard. She was thinking of justice. Of course, we can't think about forgiveness. So these things are very powerful. People, even now with the earthquake, just to tell them that this trauma response is normal is huge. And then we teach them how to breathe and to ground themselves. And I want to say, whoever would like to app, hopefully once we get it running again, just find me on the app and send me your email, and I will send you it's psychological lifeline. So let's keep the conversation going.
Thank you so much, Ms. Zarzour. And I'm so sorry. I wish there was more time for questions, but we're going to have to cut the event short. Thank you so much to all our panelists. If we can get a round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Yes,
I wish I were with you.
Yeah, and all of the slides for all the panelists will be posted in the WOVA app, so please be aware of that. I don't know exactly when they'll be posted, but they will be posted. So thank you again so much for all of our panelists. And they also, if you want to ask them questions, you can do it in the WOVA app. With that, we have another panel event starting now at 11 a.m. So you're welcome to stick around for that. And I will be passing it off to the moderator, Ms. Bonita McGee. Yes. But yeah, thank you all so much, and I'll be ending the Zoom for all the virtual folks.
Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you.
Walaikum salam.